This is the biggest leverage we've seen in mankind. It's really an extension of our brain. When you're a founder or you're using leverage such as AI, you are an orchestrator of leverage in order to, with a lot of intelligent systems and obviously intelligent people.
The Next Gen Sales Leaders Podcast. Coffees for Closers.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Next Gen Sales Leader Podcast. I'm here with Brandon Charleson, who is the founder of Top of Funnel. He is a certified Clay expert and Instantly expert. He's a family man. He's in the Air Force. He's a jack of all trades. Welcome to the show, Brandon.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me. Always good to connect.
So the thing I was super excited to talk to you about is it seems like you really are pretty technical on the Clay side of things, but we can jump directly into Clay because I know all of the users here are like GTM tech stacks. Everybody on LinkedIn is like putting their little tech stack together, and it seems like you have that understood and you help people with that to some degree. So I'd love to talk to you about that. Do you want to start there, or do you want to give a quick overview of kind of your background or how you even got into the world of GTM and engineering and Clay world?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, hopefully I can just nail both at one, in one I would say. Yeah. So my background, not specifically, I didn't professionally work as a software developer, but I was always tinkering with computers and cars and just figuring out how things work, right? Tear it apart, put it back together. And I don't want to date myself, but there's TI calculators that you bring into algebra class, and I was wondering how can I not necessarily cheat, but do it a better way. You know what I mean? So I made apps on there, made video games. My cousin was also a founding engineer at Coinbase, so him and I were really big into all things. We just always were into it. Got into Bitcoin and just really being very technical, right? I put together a lot of websites. I also have a film degree, so I've been doing video production for a while serving active duty. And then I did a Kickstarter with a buddy of mine. We were CrossFit coaches together. Did a Kickstarter, put together the whole thing, and still just doing the video production, doing the graphic design, websites, everything. You just figure it out, right? That's like bootstrapping 101. You just figure it out. Just always have had that entrepreneurial itch while serving, and then you raise a bunch of money on a campaign. You're like, oh, the world's a big place, right? And that just only kept feeding into it. You figure it out. I also, for the sales and marketing aspect, I was a recruiter in the Air Force as well. My dad was also a recruiter, so sales and marketing, it was just always in my house. Always trying to figure out a lead magnet or a way to, make money, right? Earn a living. And I was a successful recruiter in the Air Force, loved it. That was a big trajectory in my career. And then I went into the reserves because I got married, have a couple kids, and deployments, the cycles there, in order to have a business, it just didn't bode well, right? With deploying and owning a business. So you just go self-hustle, you just, figure it out. And I really, really refined recruiting, especially on the executive side. I worked with Forbes, had the opportunity to connect with that network, work with a bunch of founders, startups, big companies. And they basically said, and that was when I was using Clay in the early days. They said, hey, well, we're not hiring right now, but we need help with our sales. Can you help us with those systems? And it's like, yeah, it's the same thing. I mean, it's really just finding new prospects, right? So I just really was able to, being creative, like as a filmmaker, but also applying the technical aspects. You just figure it out. I always read the boring documents like APIs. You're always you just know how. I mean, I feel like once you get APIs, everything else kind of comes natural. It's just a language. Once you figure out the logic, it just works, right? So I just kept building and building and building on that. I obsessed early on when it comes to AI, just to not only how to use it, but how does it work and how to best use it, just to really refine and push its limits. And I just kept on that. You just, once you obsess over something, you just keep doing that. And then you look around and you find out that it's actually what people are valuable, right? That's what we bring is value around that, because it's a big world out there. A lot of people don't know how to effectively use it. And then you dive into coding and web scraping. I obsessed about web scraping, looking into the inspect tab and everything. and you just really kind of know how to acquire data to a certain degree, how to enrich it, how to mold it, and I mean, call it like it is, but I feel like that's a new unlock, and I feel like Clay makes that, you can realize that very quickly, very easily. What's a nice way to channel these sort of systems that we provide, right? So that was a long end of that, but to your point, everybody only has 24 hours in a day. So my wife and I, we're big CrossFitters. Every single morning, I'm up at 4:30, having worldwide clients. A lot of them have already conquered the day when I'm just starting. So I figure out what's broken, but then I say, hey, I am out this time to this time because I'm doing a CrossFit WOD, because health and fitness, you only get one body, you only get one family, and those are gonna, if you don't control them and embrace them, everything else is going to fall apart, right? So that's the core. So it's very true to me as far as that's concerned, because family and life and health, everything else is secondary. So I'll stop there. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, no, and I've seen you. I think there was a picture floating around in one of the Tuesday triggers where you're like absolutely jacked in one of the pictures. So yeah, I know you're really into fitness. I'm also very into fitness. I spend 2 hours a day working out. I'm more into the calisthenic world. So a lot of loaded mobility stuff. I'm working on my one-arm pull-up right now, which is pretty cool. I can do full handstands, split handstands, straddle pushes, and stuff like that. So. Nice. I need to, my cardio, I probably could not keep up with you in a WOD. So, but if you want to get a workout in when we're at Sculpt next week, I am totally down. You're going to crush me, but I would totally do one with you.
We're going to CrossFit Berlin Games, so we're going to be there at 6 a.m. So yeah, I encourage anybody who wants to show up. I don't even want to call them to say what the WOD is, because you got to keep it random. You just got to show up and see what hits us, right? Could be a
where is
a
it?
5K run. It could be 1 rep max front squat. I have no idea. You know what I mean? That's the name of the game. So. Yep.
Oh my God. Well, I'm down. Like seriously. I mean, I'm going to get absolutely murdered. My little like hip mobility workouts, I think, have prepared me a little bit. So I've been working on my front squat, by the way.
Sweet.
So,
yeah, that's good.
So,
man.
And also another connection is my grandfather was before the Air Force was the Air Force. What was that called? The Air Corps.
Army Air Corps.
With the Army. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So my grandfather in World War II was in the Army Air Corps. My brother is now in Germany. He's at the major Air Force base over there. Okay. He's in the JAG program. So he just got out of law school. He's in the JAG program. And my brother, my sister's husband is also in the reserves. He flies for Delta, but he's one of the instructors for the Air Force as a reservist. Sweet. So a lot of Air Force vibes going on here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
So you're still there?
I'm still serving, not to date myself, but it is what it is. I hit 22 years. I hit 23 years actually here in a few months. So still plugging away, but I got to be honest, the healthcare is too good. Healthcare gets expensive, especially when you're self-employed, and they do it pretty well. When especially if you deploy, they take care of you on the front end and the back end to prepare for it. So yeah, it works out with that. And the unit, we're doing a lot of cool things. Even outside my primary job, we're also testing AI in different ways to really streamline a lot of legacy stuff. So it's very interesting on some of the things and the systems that are even used still in the service. There's, not to get political, but obviously there's a lot of eyeballs and innovations that are happening, and everybody in the world, including the service, is thinking, okay, this is hitting us. What can we do to embrace it and not fall behind? And they know what I do professionally, and so I had to sit down with my commander and I said, look, this is my job. This is what I do inside the service, but this is what I do on the outside. So let's just figure it out, right? There's a lot of experimenting everywhere, and I think that's just freaking awesome. You know what I mean? I'm like, hell yes, let's do it. So it's kind of cool. That's why another thing, it's like I'm staying in. It's not your traditional, hand you a gun and go to war kind of thing. Especially the Air Force. There's just a lot of interesting things that are happening right now, and it's a big world out there. So yeah, I'll stop there. Do it.
Are you still doing the recruiting for the Air Force, or do you play a different role?
No, I was a recruiter for 7.5 years. Mostly, I started off with doing enlisted recruiting. So anybody that takes the ASVAB, wants to join, they say, I want to be a pilot or a PJ, and then I did officer recruiting. So I recruited for healthcare professionals like docs, nurses, physical therapists, things like that, as well as tech recruiting. So going for engineers, we hire engineers just as much as the civilian industry. They need engineers for sure. So I recruited for that for officers. And then the Air Force said, because the recruiting is a special duty, so if you hold that job for 8 years, that's considered your career move. But the Air Force said, hey, we need you back working on jets. So that's when I got orders from where I was at, Colorado, back to Utah, where I lived for a while, and now I live in Nevada. But I had to go back to my operational career field, which is essentially working on fighter jets at the time. And then I left active duty, and so now I help pilots with survival equipment. If anything goes wrong, they have their radios, they have their life raft, they have all their survival gear, all that kind of stuff, arm them up, that kind of thing. So it's very interesting, and it's at the tail end, but I'm in a more leadership role. So I'm working with airmen, training them, making sure they're taken care of, but also experimenting with open source models, that we just put on a laptop and we just figure out what's happening. So it's all like very, very new stuff, but it's just really interesting what gets thrown at you. You know what I mean? So no different than what we live in right here. Like I have this random ICP. How can you find my data for me? So. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it's funny you used the word ASVAB.
ASVAB.
It's the name of the test, right?
ASVAB.
ASVAB.
That's the aptitude test. Yeah.
So I took that test for the Army when I was 21, because I had this, maybe it was 19, and I remember I went down to the recruiter's office because I was obsessed with Delta Force, and I was obsessed with Green Berets. So all I would do in my evenings is just watch documentaries and watch movies, and I really wanted to be a Delta Force person, so it was kind of like this pipe dream. So I went down to the testing center, and I took the test, and it was basically a little bit of algebra, very basic algebra, and stuff about what is this tool used for. I thought it was pretty easy. So I come out of the test, and I hand in my score, and the guy does the calculation, and he looks up at me, and he goes, "Are you a goddamn genius?" And I'm like, "Why?" And he's like, "You got a perfect score." So that was my only experience with the military, but it was a funny moment, because I'm like, but it was a pretty easy test, So, anyways.
Yeah. Did they have you retest? Because they usually have you do what you call a confirmation test if you aced it. So.
No, they didn't. But I remember I was this local celebrity at the recruiter's office. So there was this little. I was University of Pittsburgh, so I went to the college recruitment office, and I walked in there he got a perfect score, and so it was kind of funny. But they were like, you can do whatever you want in the military now, and I'm like, cool. I want to be a Delta Force person. They're like, people with perfect scores don't go to Delta Force, and I'm like, are you sure? They're like, no, you got to be in IT or something else. So, anyways, I let that dream die, and I never went into the military, which I think I'm happy I didn't, because I focused on other things. But
right.
So getting back to something you said to me that's really, I think, important but subtle, is you've mentioned experimentation and just figuring it out. Those are the words that I think you used. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me that as an entrepreneur, given that we have to wear so many hats, I mean, just today I dealt with accounting, and I dealt with, some major problem with some very specific Zapier, NAN, two different no-code tools for anybody who's listening. And then on top of that, I had to jump in with a client demo for my company Reviops, and then I had to then do a sales call, and then I had to jump in to do a product review with another client's product on bugs for a completely different industry called Wellsite Navigator, which is oil and gas GPS software. So I had to jump around like a crazy person, and constant fires, constantly putting things out. And so I'm curious, where does that mindset come from for you? Is that natural for you? Is that something that you were born with? Is it something you developed? Do you think about that often? Because it seems to me that that's a pretty core part of how you succeed. Am I wrong?
You're spot on. I am also trying to figure that out, but what I would say is, there's a lot of things that could really overwhelm you quick, with all the things that are coming at you and employees needing something, and it seems like everybody wants a response and what they need right then and there, but it's just, I'm gonna say it's impossible, but it's pretty much that, right? You can only focus attention on so many things where quality starts to go down. And I would say it really comes down to people and systems, and thankfully we're in the business of that. And and then not only that, but the brain is a powerful thing, our minds. And there's, I think, not to get into the weeds of the psychology, or maybe I should, but if you ask yourself, is anybody hurt, or is this something like that is is it your now, or is it like an emergency now? You know what I mean? And I don't know, a lot of times I will try, I'm not sure if you're familiar with deep lexicon or surface lexicon. Are you familiar with that?
No.
If you look it up, it has to deal with lexicon, Lexicon. There's two types of levels in how we communicate. And I thought it was really interesting because, there's always the big speakers. Obviously a lot of us follow with like the big names of like Hormozy and all these things. But if you think about it, the psychology of how we interact with as humans is naturally, it could be on a small level or it could be on a big level. And call it like it is, but like people like Steve Jobs or any really, really big speaker that has, I would say, give a few commencement speeches or anything like that, right? Even my name is Simon Sinek is another good one. People that just provide deeper meaning into the art of communicating, and this goes into sales as well. I'm not trying to go on a wild goose chase here, but I really think it comes down to core on how many brain cycles we actually use on a particular task and how we communicate as humans. When we are, to answer your question, on the figuring it out, it's a matter of, okay, is this logic and reasoning around data, or is it a means to a relationship where human emotion is involved, I should say, because that's where human connection is deeper, right? Client relationships. And then it also comes down to, okay, what are they really asking for? Because sometimes people are emotionally triggered and they need something, but it could be very, very small to you, or there's a lot of ambiguity. Does that all make sense so far? So what I would say is, when you're approached with what seems to be to them a high priority, if you try to pause and just think logically of, is this a now problem because you say it's a now problem, or is this something that could be processed and logically, one of those things you sleep on, or you take a breath, be like, hey, you know what, let me get back to you and look and investigate this, or see what options we have. No different than what we do every day for like automations, like, hey, you have this idea, okay, this needs to be mapped out and strategically placed out. But in everyday life, if there's repeatable things and it makes sense to automate something, then we'll automate it. And I think that's the core of us as humans, and also leveraging AI to its maximum reliably, is using brain cycles that could be otherwise used for human connection, like what you and I are doing right now. Or if I'm just deep into a table or a workflow and burning brain cycles away, because we're like a battery, you only get so much. and then from there, okay, should I actually be doing this, or should I delegate this out? Should I be built? It's people and systems. Mm-hmm. And then to circle back on the lexicon, one really interesting thing I thought about with that is it's the art of communicating, where if you take a breath, you'll notice anytime you watch Steve Jobs talk, for example, he doesn't immediately answer. He actually pauses and he embraces silence. And I think that's really good for sales too, because it shows confidence, your tonality, your ability to speak, and your selection of words that are so much more powerful. You know what I mean? So those are things that I've naturally just progressed, and I learned this in sales school as well, on the art of asking questions in order to get information that you want. I used to hate this when my dad did it to me, because growing up, if I did something wrong, my brother and I, if we were up to something, he knew exactly what questions to ask me, open and probed and direct answer or questions. I'm like, shit, you know, he asked the right question, because naturally it's human to respond in such a way that you ask. You know what I mean? So if I asked you, do you know what time it is? That's technically a yes or no question. But usually people will be like, yeah, it's, you know, whatever time. You're actually volunteering information that I didn't directly ask for. So it's the natural way of communicating and trying to delegate brain cycles to things that actually are worth brain cycles. That was a big answer, but I don't know, that's just kind of psychology of how I think. Anyway, that's worked for me. And again, sleep, nutrition, working out, that's the core, because if you don't do those things, the rest is downhill. You know that for sure. So it compounds, you know what I mean? But then if you're not proactive and not doing a little bit, not saying kill yourself every day, but like in CrossFit, but like if you show up and you just do your best on that given day, regardless of your health or injuries or anything like that, you're actually going to start to either reverse the neglect, or call it like it is, but the unknown of being the best you can be psychologically and physically in order to perform in all aspects of your life. You know what I mean? Because there's always going to be things coming your way that you don't even know is going to happen. It could be literally driving to go get coffee and all of a sudden someone needs an emergency, like whatever. Anyway, I'm going to stop there. That was a really long answer, but I just like to think psychologically, especially using AI, this is the biggest leverage we've seen in mankind. And that's why I'm so obsessed with things like this, because it's really an extension of our brain. That's the biggest leverage point we could ever ask for. Yeah.
This is a break in the podcast to bring you our sponsor, ReadyOps.com. That is REVYOPS.com, the #1 GTM data management platform for your GTM and revenue operations data on planet Earth. If you are using the modern stack of Clay and Instantly and Email Bison and RB2B and Trigify and all these various tools scattered across the wind, we unify all that data all into one place so you don't have any duplicates, a unified view of every single contact so you can see all the data and all the activities across all the platforms all in one place. It will allow you and your team to move faster, to get better attribution across the entire funnel, and to make a heck of a lot more money. Go to ReadyOps.com, check out how you can get started today with me on a call where we'll learn about your data management problems and how we can get you guys to the next level of growth. See you guys at ReadyOps.com. Go there now. It will be in the show notes as well down below. Let's get back to the podcast. Yeah, so a couple follow-up points here is that one is, I love the quote for silence, which is use silence, don't let silence use you. Use silence, don't let silence use you. And the idea behind it is that we've all been there. Like, we're in a conversation. I'm doing it right now. And we want to talk, right? We want to fill the gap because it's awkward to have silence for most human beings. And so in the sales world, especially, where it's like, there's a gap, there is a compulsion to speak. And so in the sales world, it's like, I always tell people, take your tongue, the tip of your tongue, and put it on the back of your teeth. And so when somebody is speaking, you are not allowed to move your tongue from the back of your teeth. And so you have to physically make that choice to speak, because otherwise it's just so easy to be like, you know? And so and when I'm in like a big, sales call, I usually don't do that in a normal day-to-day, but when I have to be aware of my silence, I do that. And even in meetings, like, there's this great quote, I think it's Jeff Bezos, where he talks about, like, in a meeting, a good set of questions to ask yourself is like, do I need to say this now? Does this need to be said? Do I need to say this now? Am I the person to say it? Right? And because it's like we always want to get our ideas and things out. And so these little kind of mental models and principles can be really helpful from does this even need to be said? Because many times human communication can end up in just, verbose kind of storytelling and word throw up, and there's not actually real core content and meaning. And I think especially with someone like me who like I have the gift of gab, I can talk, and it just sometimes it's just not effective. So I think that's an interesting principle. The second follow-up, which you said, was like you made a really good point, but I think it's a subtle point unless people really dig into it, which is this concept of you have systems, very logical, analytical, almost like machine-like, right? There's no emotions. And then there's this entirely different, part of creativity and building and thinking that is purely emotional. And everyone goes, oh, left, right, left side of the brain, right side of the brain kind of stuff. But I think it's such an important distinction to separate out, because when I look at human performance, there is the systematic element of it. Was the process clear? Did people follow the steps? But then there's a separate question of, well, if they did not, why? Right? And oftentimes it has nothing to do with a logical explanation. It's more of an emotional-based explanation. And I'm a big fan of Dan Martell's "Buy Back Your Time" idea, which I have his book sitting here. So free shout out there for you, Dan. But my point is that I took one of his acronyms and I built on it, and I call it PPTP. PPTP. And the acronym is puppy, process, training, people. And it's a way of thinking about formulating systems and training, but it's also a way of managing people to it. And the way it goes is that if you don't know what to do, you're in puppy mode. Because oftentimes we think, oh, I got to put this in process. And I'm like super OCD, super high attention to detail. My business is called Next Gen Sales Systems. I put things into process. And so what I found was oftentimes I would put too many things into process, and I would immediately want to go and automate it. And what I found was it's so much better just to go and just fumble around for a bit and just make sure you're clear on the steps and the processes. And it's the Elon Musk quote of like, come up with the steps in the process and then try to remove some and then remove more of them. And then go and test it, and then probably remove more of it, and then you can automate it. And so that's the puppy zone. Once you have the minimum puppy element of what your process should be, then it goes into, okay, let's put a minimum viable process together, and then test it some more. And then once you're finally there, then you can put training around it, put a checklist around it. That's the 4 C's from the book. Buy back your time, and how do you create playbooks and training. And then you get people to learn it, and then you test people on it. What I've found is that's a good way of creating process. I have a whole training that I give away on LinkedIn called How to Create Playbooks, and it covers all that. But then there's a completely different element. That's all hyper-logical. But then there's an entirely different side of that equation, which is now you have human beings in it. You're doing it, and you're watching them. And my rule is, because when I was in my 20s, I'm 36. When I was in my 20s, I would get very angry at people emotionally. I'd be like, why does this person suck? Like, why aren't they doing what I told them to do?
Yes.
And one of my mentors said to me at the time, he said, are you sure they know what to do? Are you sure they know that they're supposed to do it? And I'm like, of course, it's logical. It's obvious. Any idiot would know to do that. And what I would then do is I would go and just ask the guy and be like, hey, just a quick question. You're doing this, this, and this. And my conclusion was this guy was fucking with me. And he was like, no, I had no clue. And it was like a big belief breaker for me, which is like, oftentimes things that we believe are true and obvious and clear are not obvious and clear. And so that made me rethink how I relate to people from a management perspective. And so that's where the PPTP came from, is that it's like, okay, if there is a process, don't blame the person first. Don't blame the training first. Just ask, is the process right? And if the process is wrong, then you got to solve the process before you can hold people accountable to it. Then the second piece is, okay, you have a process, you know it's good, you know it's working. Then you check the training. And if the training is sufficient, then you have to ask yourself, okay, what's wrong with this person, right?
Yep.
But it takes cycles to go through, like you're talking about brain cycles, it takes iterative cycles to go through this development of process and training. And so you got to give human beings the benefit of the doubt in those early cycles. Now, once you are certain that the training is sufficient and it's good and it's ready to go, and you still have somebody who's just not doing what they're supposed to do, and you clearly communicated it, you tested them on it, it's been documented, and they know it, then you have a people problem. And that's when you have to now start to go, what's going on? And I used to just blast people. This is the last thing I'll say here because I know I'm going on. But I used to blast people, and I'd be like, why are you not doing it? This is my 20s.
Yeah.
And I now just, my friend, another mentor said to me, usually I just ask them if something's going on in their life. And usually that just tells you a lot. So now when something really goes off, like weird, I go, hey, is there anything else coming up for you here that's blocking you? And they'll like, oh, my mom just got sick, or, I haven't been feeling well, or, I've been feeling depressed, or, I've just been having a lot of anger around, like 2 years ago, there's an anniversary of something, right? And you start to go, okay, there's something else blocking you. So these are not obvious things until you've managed dozens of people and hired dozens of people or hundreds of people. So anyways, you hit on two core subjects that I think make a lot of sense. I'm curious, what do you mean by brain cycles? I want to understand that better.
Yeah, well, Elon talks about it as well. And I think it's true. I call it like it is. I just call it brain cycles. But there's a certain level of focus and fulfillment and memory that I think it has to deal with the neurons and the science of like how brains think. And that is definitely not a topic for me, but health-wise, although I do have an exercise science degree, but it is what it is. When you wake up, you think, like, if you're fully rested, it's safe to assume you can feel like you can pretty much attack the world, right? Like you are ready to hit me, right? And then the day goes on, and then you have this fire, and you have that fire, and then you have a win, and then you have something that just really made you mad. You have all these things that are just taskfully draining your brain cycles. And when I mean brain cycles, I mean, think of it like a battery. If you're 100% charged, you can literally be at your max peak, and you have a good amount of energy to consume at your will, right? And that's nutrition, sleep, working out, that kind of thing. So when I prioritize things, there's always going to be things that are hit you, but to be able to dynamically prioritize and set timelines, especially when you have fulfillments between employees and for clients, things like that, you always want to prioritize what that looks like. And if that is like a small task or a small brain cycle task, it's debatable if you should, especially as a managerial aspect, like a founder or anybody you're managing, is that something you should delegate to another employee for them to do it so you can get your time? Or is that something you should move to like if you're working on a really, really big brain cycle, big task that requires, deep focus, then you should probably focus on that and then put that on a power list or something that way it's documented and you don't have to really remember that. So there's big tasks that is going to consume a lot, whereas on the tail end of things, if you're trying to attack a big project or do a big decision on the tail end of the day when you're about ready to turn in for the night, it's probably not best that you do that because your brain cycles are lower, right? But in the next morning, it's probably best that you thought logically, you know how to tackle it, and it might actually generate more creative ways, tactfully, technically or creatively, on how to best do things. And we think about that stuff all the day because I'll have ideas on how can I find this ICP better? Like, how do I tackle this scrape? Or what logic can I, put into an end-to-end workflow of, okay, we have this trigger, this action, and then you come up with different if-then scenarios. Everything has choices, right? There's always some direction. So what I mean by brain cycles, even in life and in business, it's really just conceptualizing how heavy is the task that I'm about to take on and how much do you have to think, because I think that's big. And if you don't eat, you're already naturally going to be irritable. I think it's just a natural way for us to go about our day. Circadian rhythm is a big thing on it too. So if you're working nights, it's a huge thing, a lot of it. But when I talk about brain cycles, the foundational things come down to everything is sequential. If you didn't get good rest, you're not going to have as many brain cycles. It's no different than your phone, in my opinion. If you're starting your day at 50%, you should probably go take a nap, regardless of how priority things are, because you'll probably get a little bit of a boost where you can focus on some because you need more brain cycles to focus on that. Does that make sense?
I just happened to last two nights, I have red lights all over my house right now. Not red light therapy, so I'm not talking about that, but just like red lights. Obviously, getting into the whole circadian rhythm kind of thing, preparing for bed. I'm very into the Don't Die movement with Brandon Charleson, and, sleep is the number one priority, yada, yada. Mm-hmm. And so I've been just trying to turn off. It's so hard for me to disconnect because right now I'm staring into a bright key light. I got the computer blaring at me. Mm-hmm. My eyes actually physically hurt right now. I got like another hair light on me here.
Yep, I'm right there with you.
I feel like at the end of the day, I feel like I'm like just losing it. And so just turning on red light, it's been weird. It's been like I sit there in the dark and all of a sudden my eyes see differently. The last two nights I have Sleep 8, which is like this, sleep tracking thing that like cools your body at night. I'm into the biohacking stuff. And so I've noticed that my HRV has been coming up and my heart rate's been coming down just by adding in that little hour red light of just like chilling out in the dark before going to bed. But it's a tremendously difficult problem for me because I work so freaking hard. I work like 15, 16-hour days. I wake up, I'm immediately out of bed. Within 5 minutes, I'm on a call. So in the first like 60 minutes, I'm just half alive. Mm-hmm. And then I go and go and go and go, and I get to the end, and then I go to the gym, and I don't do my workouts in the morning. I do them in the evening, which is probably not ideal. And so then I eat a very late meal. So I eat a heavy meal right before bed, and then I'm watching Netflix because I'm so depleted of dopamine because I've worked so freaking hard that like I sleep like crap, and then I do it again. And it's unhealthy, and I need to solve for that because my God, this is not sustainable, the path I'm on. So this idea of brain cycles relation to that makes a lot of sense. And the big insight for me in the last year has been that discernment and judgment, like the way that Jeff Bezos says, is that really successful people just have to be right a lot. And what that means is like you have to there's subtle little like decisions you make every single day, like tiny decisions that can make a massive impact. And there's a great quote from Alex Ramosi where he says, the number one role of a CEO is to identify your greatest constraint and then allocate resources to solve for it. Mm-hmm. But that ability is discernment. You have to be able to go, okay, I have 1,000 little items here, and I need it, to your point about prioritize. I need to prioritize, and then within that list, I need then to understand and weight how big is this? Does this have to happen right now? Can this wait? And there's an element of analysis. There's an element of human side of analysis. There's 1,000 little computations happening across all these different things. Mm-hmm. And you have to be able to make the right decision. Mm-hmm. And that is a discernment and judgment thing. And I like the word taste. There's so many great quotes. One from Steve Jobs. We seem to be bringing up the same people, which is like, he says like, it all ultimately comes down to taste. And taste is this ability to perceive aesthetics and goodness and elegance within a solution. Mm-hmm. And that is discernment. That takes brain cycles. And so I like that you use the analogy of the battery because, I built a van myself. I built it from scratch, had the shell of a van, a Ford Transit, 350 high roof. Mm-hmm. Every part of carpentry, electrics, plumbing, you name it, I did it. Every little nut and bolt.
Yep. Same
One
here.
of the parts of it was, what did you say?
Same here. I was a car nut.
Oh, you did it.
Building engines. Yeah, I was a racer. I owned a few Hondas. And,
me too. There you go. We got a lot in common going on here.
Oh man, you speak K20 and H22 and EG and all that.
I don't know about that. You just went over my head there.
I'm
not that.
How about JDM?
No,
No?
I think I was. So when it comes to like the engine component, I was just the poor man's version of the racer, where I liked the fart can on the back of the vehicle. I liked my cold air intake.
Yes.
You know, I liked my like underbody, like, you know, like glowing when I was 16 years old.
Yes.
And I would get into some of the engine components, but I never did any tuning or anything. So I was like a wannabe racer. Let's be clear.
That's funny. I love it, man. Now those are engines and chassis codes. You know, when you're in like the JDM, you usually do an engine swap, like, you know, B16 or, you know, that kind of stuff. I'm not sure if you got into that stuff, but yeah, fart can, you nailed it, man. Loud and, you know, obnoxious. And I got rid of mine, you know, after getting married, because it come down to two things: is cops or thieves. One of them's gonna get them, so
dude, cops.
Might as well grow up.
Oh my god. Don't get me started on the cops, but let me just finish one loop, which is there's lithium-ion batteries, and there's a company called Battleborn Batteries. And when I built the whole battery system with all these different like gauges of wire, you know, 2-aught, 1-aught, that kind of stuff. And you have to have solar panels feeding into the lithium ion, but you need this particular unit that regulates a constant stream of voltage into the battery. So anyways, the reason I say that is that like it's actually, this is the reason that you have to plug in your Tesla at night and keep it going, is that the lithium ion battery needs some current coming into it, which needs some kind of like charge. And I think it's an interesting idea for the brain too, which is like we don't want to overwork, because then we just die, we deplete the battery down to nothing, but we also can't completely disconnect. We need some stimulus. It's a very interesting analogy, the idea of brain cycles and battery.
And you need your trickle while getting snacks throughout the day, hydration, little stuff like that. Yeah,
it's a great analogy.
Thank you. I love that you said, let me close this loop, because it definitely shows, it shows to me that you're familiar with like open loop and closed loop hacking, if you will.
Well, where that actually comes from, I think I do understand that concept. It comes from that when I get with people like yourself who are really smart and think like kind of like I do, we can open up many open conversations, and then it's easy. You can start to it's almost like a folder system where you start to nest ideas, and you're like, well, this story, but that relates to this concept, and then there's another thing, and it's so easy to lose the thread and go, wait, why were we talking about this? At least like 50% of podcasts, I like have to like literally cut out a section where I'm like, dude, I completely forget where we were going with this. But the point of like this nested feedback loop is, if I don't have my pad of paper today, but usually I'll write down the loop I'm on. I'll be like, okay, I'm on loop 5, and I'll see the sub nests. And so I like to like at least close it down, because some of the listeners will be like, dude, you like, we're about to make some really important point, and then you just jumped over to some stupid like alien asteroid concept, and it's like completely lost to me. So
Yep, absolutely. Well, I'll say on the loop aspect, I love that you said that, because I don't even know if this is a term, but like it's true. Like people naturally like to close the loop on things, because if you leave it in an open loop, it feels unfinished. And you can actually use that as leverage in sales and cold email and sales, you know, in general, because it naturally, as if you text somebody, it naturally makes them feel like they should respond. And not to go down that track unless you want to, but that's where that open loop, like we as humans naturally want to communicate, because naturally people are nice. You know, some people say kick rocks and all that stuff, but it's in my opinion, a hack on the psychological aspect of the art of communicating the way you want to, right? So I love that you said that. So that's good. And way to keep the podcast on course. Even, you know, we brought up like, you know, car stuff. So, yep. Yeah.
Well, so there's, this is now where I'm going to have that moment where it's like, I'm going to lose the bigger thread. But it's a good point, is that like, there's so many fun things to talk about. And what I try to do on the podcast is I try to at least have some congruency of like, look, like we're going all over the place. We're telling stories, we're learning things, we're talking about concepts, but there's a through line, you know? And I try to do that as well in my sales pitches. So I have this book I wrote called The $1 Million Pitch Method. It's not published. It's in my school community. So if anybody wants to check it out, go into it's a $5 school community somewhere in my LinkedIn profile, Benjamin Reed. And deep in the classroom section, there's this thing called the $1 Million Pitch Method. It's a free Google Doc that I wrote. And I wrote it to teach sales reps how to pitch. So my claim to fame is I'm really good at selling high-ticket software. Sold multi-million-dollar deals, enterprise-level deals. And I came up with this kind of self-taught method of presenting things logically. And it heavily relies on breakthrough advertising's Eugene Schwartz's. I bring that book up every podcast, but it's the idea of the awareness scale of unaware, problem aware, solution aware, brand aware, product aware, etc. And it's this idea of bringing somebody psychologically through an awareness scale so that they can arrive at a conclusion that is logical for them, and they essentially can't say no if you get agreement across the steps of that awareness. If you want to get more on that, anybody listening can go and get that. But one thing I do with this concept of open loops in the pitch is I, throughout the entire presentation, and I think I even got this from Russell Brunson, where he talks about this on webinars, where it's this idea of, you'll say, so if you stay till the end, right, immediately that's an open loop. You're going to get something. But I do that, I call them micro loops. So what I'll say is like, so what we're going to talk about in about 4 slides is a case study on how we da-da-da-da-da. Or like what you're going to see later. And soon what you'll see is, right, and I'll allude to something that's coming. And it's this, I'm opening up 10 or 20 loops in their mind, and then I'm fulfilling those loops as I go through the pitch. So it's this constant like dopamine, like, oh, I want that, I want that.
Yes.
And I try to do that throughout the pitch, and it is quite helpful, especially if you have a complex product and you have to get through a lot of ideas. You'll say like, look, I'm going to make the big overarching problem statement and get you to agree to that. But then I'm going to show you later on how these solutions match up to the problem. And then hopefully you'll see that the product that we're going to demo for you today actually helps address both the problem that you want to address in a solution that is your dream outcome. And they'll say, does that sound good? And they'll say, yeah, that's interesting. And then I'll keep doing it. So yeah, it's a critical part of sales.
I love it. You know, not to transition this into AI, I mean, obviously your audience is there. I think that AI, the way LLMs are scientific, it's obviously an ongoing study because they're evolving. But I really think that LLMs, the way they tokenize and context windows, are much like our human brains on open loop and keeping it and steering the AI model exactly as it needs to do. You know what I mean? And because it is a sequence of tokens, it's always predicting what you're going to say next. And if you if your conversation goes way off, you lost the AI's attention, and it's still going to give you whatever it can. Because, but it's very similar to the same. So the mindset of exactly what you said on open loop, closed loop, the micro loops, keeping it, that's steering the conversation, not just for humans, but using that for use with AI as well. The other part, again, I guess I would tie this, and then perhaps we close out the conversation, is tying in the psychological aspects of how we think as humans, how we communicate as humans, and being maximum productivity, right, of being able to do as much output as we can and consume as much as we need to in order to be productive, right? And so I'll say that with 2 things because, obviously with AI, things are evolving as quick as they are, but speech to text is obviously evolving big time with the speech to text models. Generally speaking, most people will type, anywhere from 60 words a minute up to like 120. I don't know. I tested the other day. I was like, I just wonder. And I'm usually in the 90 to 114 range or so.
That's pretty fast.
That's not fast. Sustainable. I'm like, all the common words.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And I was just curious because I wanted to know how fast can I reasonably type with those type, text, those typing tests or whatever. And then I'm like, okay, if I was Ludacris or Twista, and I spoke as fast as possible to an AI model, what's my words per minute if I speak? You know what I mean? And I mean, for most humans, I think you can 2 or 3x that. And, you know, I don't know anybody that can type as fast as they can speak. I don't care who you are. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think about that because I think that's, and then again, back to the surface and deep lexicon, no matter what you're talking about. If you can hit that record or that microphone button on ChatGPT or whatever speech to text app you use, you know, I'll usually always cap out that 10-minute window, and I'll sit there, and sometimes I'll embrace the silence because I'm thinking, like, what actual words can I articulate that really, really specify and add flavor and color to what I want as an output or what I want to articulate to a human or an AI. And I think that's important because psychologically, if you get into that practice, it just becomes more and more natural. And I think that it helps with all things in business and personal life. Psychologically, how we can, we're an orchestrator. When you're a founder or you're using leverage such as AI, you are an orchestrator of leverage in order to, you know, with a lot of intelligent systems and obviously intelligent people. But if you're properly orchestrating and leveraging these tools, especially with AI, you're using your brain, consuming brain cycles, and actually getting so much deeper, better outputs no matter what you do. Yeah, I would say that that's true. And to consume content, you know, not to detract things, but you can only consume content as specific. Like, who watches videos at more than 2x speed? You know what I mean? It's either 1x or 1.5, maybe 2x. I don't know anybody that's gone beyond 2x. My wife watches things on 2x. I don't know how she does that. But if you can read, you can usually read tons faster and consume content really quickly. So whenever possible, I usually like to read as much as possible because you can skim and understand. But then you can bet your tail I'm going to be speaking to a computer as much as possible to the point where you can, you know what I mean? So from a productivity standpoint and consuming brain cycles, to be able to articulate good prompts and communicate really effectively in all areas of your life, I would say, like you said, closed loops or open loops, micro, keep it precise and on target. Embrace silence, because when you embrace silence, you actually have deeper meaning. And I'll give you one example. Maybe this could resonate with the audience, but if you were to ask anybody in your life, you know, even your kids, like, what did you have for breakfast today? Something basic. And usually they'll answer. But then I say, okay, I want you to pause for 3 to 5 seconds, and I want you to be as detailed and clear as possible on what you ate for breakfast. Talk, and then you'd be surprised at some of the answers. You know, we did this as a class demonstration, but they'll be like, oh, well, I made wheat toast and put a little, you know, they get super detailed and they use a lot more colorful words. And I'm like, see, that is the practice of using deep lexicon. And you're so much better of a storyteller for that. And people, you speak more confidently and you get just better quality communication.
Given that LLMs are so reliant on word selection, I think it's a really important idea for anybody who wants to improve. I think in any realm of the AI world, I'm prompting, in copywriting, in just creating content, general, being on podcasts, communicating in a sales environment, whatever. You got to be really, really, really good at, I think, deeply questioning which word choice you're making. I remember when I think I've told this story on the podcast before, but I'll keep it very short, which is I was in school, I was a philosophy major, and it was a blessing to be a philosophy major because all you do as a philosophy major is look for counterexamples and ask specifically, what do you mean by X? So literally, it's like all you're doing, Logic 101, philosophy, Intro to Philosophy, they basically say like, well, what is a sound argument? And it's like, you know, the bottom line is you have to come up with your premises, your little, you know, the things that are true, the statements you make. And then they all have to be true. The whole thing to be sound has to be true. The inferences have to be connecting together, which is like A, you know, equals B and B equals C, therefore X, right? And so you have to very precisely think through all of the word choice. So somebody says like some like tongue twisting puzzle, like all boxes are square and all square things have, you know, whatever. the way that you can start to attack the logic is just by saying, well, what do you mean by square? It seems like obvious, but like when you start to question obvious things, they become not so obvious. And you're like, well, a square is a four-sided object, and yeah, it's a four-sided object that has flat surfaces and 90-degree angles at each corner. And so then you start to go, well, what do you mean by 90-degree corner? Well, you can go down this rabbit hole. And so in as a philosophy major, that is a relatively obvious kind of like pretty black and white thing. But when you get into nuances of like a word that's kind of debatable, but your entire communication is predicated on the meaning of that word, you need to be precise. You need to define the terms. It's the same thing, even like getting back to data engineering. One of ReviOps, my company, our whole thing is a central database that merges multiple databases into one database. The primary challenge in doing that is the semantic definitions of the schema, which basically just means that in one database, you might have a column header, think of a CSV file or a column header, and it might be called name. In another database, you have a name too, but it's called names. And in a third database, it might be called named. And yet you want these three schemas to actually mean the same thing, call it namers. And so you have to make a distinction at a linguistic level, the semantic level, which is like, these three things actually mean this. And so even at the most basic level of like data engineering, you have to define these terms. Otherwise, the meaning gets lost, and all of a sudden you end up with three columns in your database that all say different things, but they all mean the same thing. And then you're doing a query via an API endpoint, and you're wondering why you're getting a weird answer. And it's actually like, this gets back to like, everyone's obsessed with MCPs, and like, I'm going to build these reports with MCPs, and my response to that is, I'm like, yeah, but is the data good? And it's like, the answer to is the data good is like, well, is the domain model appropriate? Is the schema accurate? Is it actually deduplicated? Are the names normalized? And so there's these questions about, we're talking about word choices. We're talking about the way that things are structured at a level of literally spelling. And that's really the fundamentals of data engineering and AI. Because everything is a predictive analysis of word choice and then trying to predict the next thing. So that's a long-winded way to say, like, be precise, get clear, define your terms, whether you're talking to someone on a podcast, whether you're having a conversation with an agreement with your wife, or whether you're defining the schema for a central database. It all comes down to choices of words. It's a really interesting idea.
And so that is the modern day context engineering as we know it for humans, right? You gave it context. So yeah, around all the scenarios, and just deeper meaning on painting the whole picture, or giving full context. I guess that goes full loop on what you talked about, PPTP, of being able to know employees having full context around the task and requirements that they need to do, right? So that's awesome, man. That's great. Well, I do have to wrap up here shortly. So we always like to ask as a last question here. First off, where can people find you? Where, like, either your company website, LinkedIn, or wherever you want, X. What do you prefer? Yeah, topoffunnel.com is our website, and you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm on the other social media channels, but primarily LinkedIn and website works. And
how would you spell your name on LinkedIn so everyone can find you?
Brandon Charleson, linkedin.com/in Brandon-Charleson. Yep.
And there's going to be links in the in the description for anyone who's listening. So we'll include the website link as well as the LinkedIn URL as well. So if you guys want to check out Brandon, you can certainly do so. So final question that we always ask is, if you want to leave everyone with one piece of insight about life, business, you're speaking to yourself 10 years ago and you want to leave one thing, what are you saying?
Tell somebody that you deeply care about exactly that, whatever that level is, every single day, because we're all humans at the end of the day, We all have jobs. We're all just trying to figure out a lot of things and learn something new every day. And the deeper meaning of life is obviously connecting with people that you care about, right? So to actually articulate that, I think that goes full circle in the meaning of life. So I would just say that.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in to the Next Gen Sales Leader podcast. We'll see you guys on the next episode. Thanks a lot, Brandon, for coming on, and I'll see you next week at Scoped.
Yes, sir. All right. Take care. Thanks.